Hey everyone, this is a VoD review of Clutch Gaming versus TSM. I'm John Valentine, and let's get into it. So, the linchpin of this game is going to be the top lane Vayne. And yes, I realize the casters also and the observers and everyone was just talking about the top lane Vayne, and even though a lot of the action was taking place elsewhere on the map. But the top lane Vayne is really the most important part of this game for both teams, so I have to focus on it. Um, the kind of logic behind picking a top lane Vayne is, hey, Vayne is a late game scale, is an early spiking but late game scaling AD carry that very often loses lane very hard. But if we put her top lane, we can get her a winning matchup so that we can have this strong mid and late game AD carry and also not completely concede a lane to do so. The problem with that is that it's kind of more complicated than that. Vayne as a champion is perfectly okay with being behind. If she weren't, she wouldn't function in the AD carry role, which is where we see her actually being successful. What Vayne really needs is the rest of her team to be ahead. It's okay if Vayne is hitting her item spikes late, as long as she isn't so far behind she is able to eventually hit them. What's really important for a Vayne team comp is for the rest of the team to be able to have that pressure elsewhere so that the Vayne doesn't fall too far behind, and then for the rest of the team in fights to be able to put damage pressure and threat onto the members of the enemy team such that the enemy team has to be responding to, say, the Lissandra and the Elise and whatever else is on your team, and then Vayne is able to kind of just free hit and be her own kind of carry without the other team trying or able to interact with her because they're being kept busy by the rest of Vayne's team. If the rest of Vayne's team falls behind and is unable to fulfill that role, if Vayne is the only member of her team that is ahead, or if nobody on Vayne's team is ahead but the Vayne, it's very easy for the members of TSM in this case to just focus down the Vayne and burst down the Vayne, and then the rest of the team's behind, so it's okay if we don't focus them. And once the Vayne's out of the way, now you're ahead, and this threat of the Vayne isn't there anymore. And if Vayne is the one being focused down, she does have a difficult time dealing with that. And the problem that this causes with specifically top lane Vayne is that top lane Vayne requires resources. She's very vulnerable to early ganks. She's really dependent on winning, and that means that you're putting your resources towards getting the Vayne ahead to stop her from dying to these ganks, to be able to provide that vision and that defense that the Vayne requires in order to survive in the laning phase. But as a result, the rest of your team isn't getting that pressure. The rest of your team isn't getting those resources, so the rest of your team doesn't actually get ahead like the Vayne really wants them to. So we are going to kind of see that. Yeah, Piglet's going to have an advantage in this mid lane matchup because it's a favorable matchup for Lissandra, but Xayah Rakan is kind of an overrated duo, and it's going to just fall behind and get out pressured by the Lucian. And Galio is particularly good into Rakan, even though he normally isn't considered a strong laner. So right now, it's normally a Vayne comp wants top and mid to be ahead, but they want champions who are not Vayne to be the top and mid that are ahead. So accelerating Vayne is not really that useful is the thing. And by picking top lane Vayne, you are kind of railroading yourself into putting a bunch of resources towards accelerating the Vayne, and that's not really where you want to be. Tack onto that the fact that this is a blue side top lane Vayne and that TSM therefore got to counterpick it, and things get even worse. We have this now Vayne Akali matchup where, yeah, the Vayne's going to get accelerated to some extent. She is going to be very strong and the Akali is going to be very weak for the first 10 minutes of the game. But once the Akali gets past level 6 and picks up the Gunblade, Vayne stops actually winning that 1v1. This isn't some tank top lane. This isn't a Scion Vayne can just wail on. This is a champion that will return damage and can absolutely burst down a Vayne fairly easily. So it's a really poor choice of top lane for Clutch. And it looks like the Vayne is winning and the Vayne is ahead. Yeah, she has 20 CS. This is going so great. But it ultimately is not where you want your lead to be if you are Clutch. And it is so demanding of resources that the rest of the map is going to kind of fall apart. Tack onto that the really, really unlucky Drake RNG for Clutch of there being an early Infernal when your bottom lane is behind and your jungler has to be spending time topside because that's where your pressure is, and Vayne is vulnerable to ganks. And it's pretty easy to start seeing why this game can fall apart for Clutch. It is nice that they have been able to pick up that control ward onto the Infernal Drake. It does make it more difficult, or at least somewhat marginally more difficult for TSM to get that early. And if the Skarner shows up on that pink ward to try and threaten the dragon like you would expect, then that means that Lyra doesn't need to be top lane anymore because Vayne is now safe from a gank because Skarner is shared bot. So Lyra can then follow to the Drake and contest that to some extent. So that's actually really good. Being able to catch out that the Drake is an option and being able to basically spot Acadian on it does apply a lot of pressure, not just to the top side, which is what you would normally expect when a jungler shows bottom, but it also applies pressure to the bottom side because it means Lyra is no longer priced into spending time topside. Especially now that Broken Blade has finally hit level 6 and can actually consider putting some amount of threat onto the Vayne. So Clutch is doing a good job keeping this Infernal Drake warded. It is a valuable ward, more so than a Dragon ward would normally be. So that's good to see out of them. However, they are losing this mid lane matchup in which you would expect them to have pressure, especially with the extra Dark Seal on Piglet. And they are kind of hard losing this bot lane matchup. Galio, as I mentioned, is pretty strong into Rakan, so this is going quite well for TSM, actually. We do kind of see, though, that Vayne is backing up, right? This is a matchup that Vayne should still be ahead in, and Vayne is backing up, which should imply to TSM that Lyra isn't topside, and that Clutch, or Huni at least, expects Acadian to be topside. The Vayne could absolutely easily be shoving this wave in and trying to get pressure onto a turret plate. The fact that she isn't does kind of imply Lyra is near the bot side, and TSM has now spent a pretty significant amount of time push toward the bottom side, with Lyra probably being bot side. That gives Lyra a lot of opportunities to go bot line and look for a gank, and that is what does end up happening. We see both flashes coming out of TSM, and Smoothie eventually going down. Now, because there is this bot lane pressure, because Lyra and Vulcan both have to recall because this is this squishy Rakan and this squishy Elise, so they did get quite chunked out there. And because Piglet, for some reason, decides to rotate top lane to try and accelerate this Vayne, TSM is able to lose a bot lane fight and then pick up the Infernal Drake anyway. This is very unfortunate for Clutch because looking into these lane matchups, you would expect TSM would get the Infernal Drake for free, but they were just able to get a pretty, actually, really solid fight. They picked off Smoothie. They got more flashes than they spent. Or no, they spent the same number of flashes. Lyra flashed as well. But they got both of the bot lane's flashes. This is looking like a situation where Clutch could maybe actually put some sort of contest onto this Drake that they would otherwise not really be able to do. But because Piglet decides to play more towards topside, because this Rakan is a very, very squishy support with kind of limited sustain, who does choose to recall, they lose the Drake anyway. It's unfortunate, but it's honestly what you would expect going into these lane matchups anyway, so you can't be too unhappy as Clutch. And this is kind of the natural follow-on. You have pressure top, but you don't have pressure bot, so you would expect to lose Drakes and get Herald, so Clutch, they get Herald. Now, if I'm Clutch here, what I would really want to be seeing is this Herald popped immediately in the mid lane. Normally when you see a Herald picked up this early, you see it dropped in whichever lane has the most pressure for your team, to try and snowball that lane. However, as I mentioned, you really are hoping for this Lissandra to get ahead to a point where she is able to apply enough pressure to the members of TSM that Vayne can free hit. And as I said, accelerating the Vayne further isn't necessary. So I would really like seeing this Rift Herald to be dropped mid and have that extra 300 gold delivered onto Piglet instead of onto Huni to try and get him an advantage over Bjergsen, instead of falling behind in this Lissandra Ryze matchup, which was going to eventually get outscaled. It's looking not necessarily fantastic on the side of Clutch. Yes, they did pick up the first blood, but they didn't get anything for it. They lost the objective. They didn't actually relieve any pressure bottom lane by doing so. Yes, they got the objective trade and they have this 1,000 gold lead, but a lot of that is on the Vayne, who is, as we can see right now, starting to not actually win this 1v1 anymore. This Herald is going to be a lot less useful than the Infernal Drake will eventually. And they are going to get this nice chunk of turret plates, but instead of focusing it onto the Lissandra, who would have been able to transfer that into a 1v1 advantage over the Ryze in what's going to probably be a 1-3-1, they choose instead to spread it out onto their bottom laners. Plus onto their bottom laners and jungler, which I think is really poor. A bunch of gold on one person is generally more valuable than gold spread out on a number of people. Yes, you could argue that the goal for Clutch is to try and push down the bot lane turret so that you can get your bottom lane out of this kind of really rough matchup. But that's not even feasible, because if your bottom lane isn't in this matchup, somebody has to be, and Huni's going to do even worse in a 2v1 situation. So things are not looking so good for Clutch at this point. Yes, they have a lead, but they don't have a lead on the people who need it. As I said, the Vayne is dependent on the other members of her team being able to be advantage and apply that pressure, but the only one who is ahead on the side of Clutch is the Vayne. So it's really easy for TSM to just all in the Vayne and burst down the Vayne, and then pretty much all of the advantage, any sort of advantage for Clutch Gaming is gone, and you have this stronger 5v5 team against a Xayah, Rakan, Elise composition. It is going to be difficult for Clutch to accomplish much as this game goes on. They have the inferior 5v5 because they have no tank frontline, they have an Elise, they have this kind of really pick-oriented setup. So if they can pressure a bunch of lanes and get really far ahead and pressure the Baron and force picks to occur with the Rakan engage and the huge amount of CC they can follow that up with, yay, good for them. But if, as the game continues, what I would expect to happen, the Akali gets to the point where she can 1v1 the Vayne very easily and is able to pressure out the Vayne, and the existence of a frontline for TSM and the lack thereof for Clutch Gaming means that TSM can fairly safely face check as a group into the Fog of War and can force vision into places that Clutch doesn't want them to have vision. It is absolutely feasible and very a reasonable thing to expect that TSM can not let these picks occur and can force the 1-4, which will become untenable for the Vayne, and just kind of slowly expand their lead all over the map and shut Clutch out of the game. The only reasonable way for Clutch to win a fight is if Huni is able to survive for an extended period of time and provide an awful lot of DPS. The problem with that is that Vayne spikes at her best. In order to be really, really Vayne, she needs to have the Bork plus the Guinsus, right? Those are kind of that's her core setup, and she's finishing the Bork now. But that's going to be those 2 items are going to be delayed by the fact she had to pick up a Hex Drinker to try and deal with the Akali burst, because this is an unfavorable matchup. And even with said Hex Drinker, right here, we're going to get to see Huni just get completely dumped on, even though he has such a massive gold lead over Broken Blade. But anyway, the incredibly powerful 2-item power spike for this Vayne, delayed by having to pick up the Hex Drinker, further delayed or made worse by the fact that there is a Skarner, so he's going to need a QSS on top of the Hex Drinker. So even if you get this Vayne ahead, that just makes it so that TSM has a harder time bursting her down. That doesn't actually accelerate a lead much at all, because of the Akali, because of the Skarner, and the ways that TSM is able to threaten the Vayne. It doesn't matter how much of a lead. Like, you would need to get enough of a lead for this Vayne to have the Hex Drinker and the QSS and her 2-item spike at the same time that everyone else is getting their 2 items. And for Vayne to basically be ahead by 2,500 plus gold in order to basically be even and to behave as a Vayne. And it's not going to happen. The lead isn't large enough. They're already to the point where the Akali is actually stronger in the 1 versus 1. Looking back on this fight, which I have completely skipped over, it starts off as an aggressive play from TSM onto the bottom side, which is kind of exactly what TSM want to be doing. As I said, Clutch is dependent on their non-Vayne members to be ahead. So TSM's goal, therefore, should theoretically be to shut down the non-Vayne members as much as possible. Yes, shutting down Vayne on top of that is very useful, but putting the rest of the Vayne team behind is a really actually effective way of shutting down a Vayne. So they make the aggressive play, they run Warp in, Vulcan gets a really good prediction knock-up to disengage this fight. And at this point, the fight is over. TSM is over-chased by trying to follow in. Acadian takes an extra turret shot, and is low health. As a result, they are going to lose, to some extent, their ability to actually pressure down this turret. And now Acadian is recalling, and Bjergsen is walking out, and Sven and Smoothie are now pretty much alone. Acadian cancels the recall, but he's still low health. He is not going to be able to do anything, and he is now going to recall under the turret. Lyra has now managed to rotate in after shoving out the mid-wave to stop the Rise, or at least pull the Rise away. So Rise is forced into a situation where he either has to give up his pressure in the bottom lane or give a bunch of CS in the mid lane. He chooses to go back mid lane. And TSM has no vision, right? They went for this aggressive play. Look at the vision. No vision. Which means that in response, Clutch can just kind of waltz right in and walk right on top of Smoothie, who's recalling, and Smoothie will die for this. It, I believe, is a 1-for-1 trade because the Xayah isn't there, and the burst damage on put all onto the tanky Galio means that Lucian can free hit, and he is at a very powerful point, and all 3 of the Clutch members who are there are very squishy because, again, they don't have a real front line. But still, really pretty solid from Clutch. They pick up that first turret. They they answer the TSM aggression very, very well. It is aggression you should be expecting. This is how a team should be playing around this Vayne, and by basically being able to have the jungle to answer with it, to shut down the engage initially with the Rakan, have the jungler push out the mid wave to pull the Rise away, and then rotate down. Have your mid laner already there to stop the recalls and apply a little bit of extra pressure. Clutch actually responds to this play really, really well, and this actually is really good to see. It was a very calm, measured response from to the aggression from TSM, and it works out very well for them. And this is the only real glimpse we get to see of Clutch putting the focus that there needs to be onto the non-Vayne members, and actually kind of getting these really well thought out, measured responses to TSM aggression. So the map resets. Clutch rotates their bottom lane mid, as one would expect after picking up the bot lane turret. However, Piglet is kind of slow on this rotation, which means that TSM is going to pick up this bottom lane turret in response for free. This is not really what you want to be seeing. Trading objectives is generally going to be favorable for TSM, simply because as the game goes on, Vayne is going to lose value in this 1 versus 1, and Rise is going to continue to scale up, contrary to the Lissandra, and Skarner is also going to continue to become more powerful compared to the Elise. So trading objectives for Clutch, non-ideal. Allowing the TSM bottom lane to shove up like that is also non-ideal. It would have been very easy for Lyra to have been bottom side right then instead of top side. But again, this is what the Vayne requires. Vayne requires your jungler to give her a lot of attention. So cool, you get this Vayne ahead, but the rest of your team is behind. And if the rest of your team is behind, the Vayne can just be focused. Cadian's gonna get caught a little bit, but that's not relevant. Here we're gonna see Huni get really kind of the best case scenario 1 versus 1, right? So this is the best case scenario. You get a nice condemn off. You have this bush vision advantage to some extent to play around. This is pretty much the best case scenario for the Vayne Akali matchup in this 1v1 at this point. However, if you look at the map, there are pretty much all of TSM is between Huni and the rest of his team. Which means that if this fight goes long, which you would expect because it is it is a bunch of self-sustain and a Seeker's Arm Guard on one champion and a Hex Shrinker and more self-sustain on the other champion. If this fight goes long, which you would expect any fight that involves an Akali to be able to do, because Akali is able to extend fights very well with her sustain with the Shroud, TSM will be the first to this play. They are closer. So, in order for this 1v1 to be successful, Huni needs to either win the 1v1 very quickly, or get a good chunk off and then get out. His only way out, because of the way this is positioned, is either up onto the Blast Cone, which is going to be very difficult because you will get stunned up by the Akali dash, or out directly towards the other members of TSM. This is a really bad position for Huni to be in, and it's going to be compounded by the fact that there was a Realm Warp, there's a Galio ult. So Huni is going to be forced to flash. He is going to be followed up with the Realm Warp. Pretty much all of TSM is to this play before Clutch Gaming is. Zven isn't really able to take part. He possibly could have come in on the flank there because the Rakambo was already spent. He chooses instead to go up the river, and because Piglet gets a really good teleport flank, he will get a trade kill onto Acadian. But this is still a shutdown onto the Vayne that the Akali, I think, was able to pick up. This is not what you want if you are Clutch Gaming. Yes, it's nice that the Lissandra picked up a kill that is going to help in Lissandra's ability to pressure the members of TSM so that Vayne can be a part of fights. But the item breakpoints, the damage on the mid and bot lane for Clutch Gaming is just not there. They don't have enough threat onto the members of TSM to punish TSM for hard tunneling onto Huni. So, even trade, once again, even trades favor TSM. If you tack onto that the fact that Huni is now at a flash disadvantage in this matchup, which he is now starting to fall behind in, it's looking rough for Clutch. Yes, they are technically still ahead. They do still have a gold lead. They do still have some amount of vision onto the map. But as the game continues, it's going to get worse. They are down in Drakes. They are losing in their mid and bottom lane. And honestly, they're losing top lane too, even if there's a gold advantage. In this ranged versus melee matchup, the 21 minutes in, with all of the time that Lyra spent topside, they have yet to pick up the top lane turret. And they've seeded multiple Drakes in exchange for not picking up the top lane turret. They have not been able to execute the goals of their team composition very well. And to be fair, the goals of the Clutch Gaming team composition are incredibly foggy because it is a disynergistic team composition because top lane Vayne is a poor pick. But snowballing the Vayne, not useful. Giving up a bunch of pressure bottom side that they tried to regain with the Rift Herald play, but were unable to really do because they just allowed Zen and Smoothie to come in and take the bot lane turret after the play. Like, things are not working out for Clutch. We saw right there, Huni was finally able to pick up the top lane turret, and that was only because 3 members of Clutch walked into the TSM red side jungle, so Broken Blade was forced to back off for risk getting dove. Lyra does actually steal this Drake, which is, I guess, nice if you're Clutch. It's good to have. It's good to die from TSM, but it's not going to be game changing. The Mountain Drake does mean that with this Clutch Gaming comp, they can kill the Baron very, very quickly. They have a lot of damage. However, they are all incredibly squishy, so they will get chunked out if they do try to go for the Baron. And there is a Realm Warp, there is a Galio ult. It is very easy for TSM to make their way into the Baron pit to counter out such an attempt. So, Clutch is already, yeah, they've just picked up a few turrets, but they aren't really in as commanding a lead as you would think watching this game play out. We see there is pressure advantage in the mid lane and pressure advantage in the bottom lane still. We see Cody's Sun is off in the red side jungle when Baron vision is an issue. We are seeing Huni stuck under his turret in the 1 versus 1 on a Vayne top, which you never want to see. And we are about to see, I believe, is the game-ending fight. And this is Huni didn't pick up QSS, went for Hexshrinker instead, because he wanted to win lane. Was unable to pick up QSS because he went Hexshrinker and is so dependent on getting the 2 items. So when Skarner is waiting in that bush, Huni steps too far forward, Skarner Akali bursts him down. He is able to survive with very low health, which is almost worse for Clutch, because we get to watch. So far, TSM has burned Broken Blade ult, he's burned Akali ult, and Skarner ult. Clutch has burned Vayne ult. But we get to watch. Vulcan just burned Flash, Heal, Shield, his dash, and the entire recombo. So there's a flash, dash, heal. Doesn't actually use the ultimate here, but there it goes. Vulcan will burn everything. Cody-san will burn everything. So Vulcan burns both of his summoners and his dash to try and save Huni from the ticking ignite, so that Huni can get 2 more auto attacks off in this fight, right? The rest of Clutch commit to this fight, partially because Huni survived. Now we can turn, but their engage tools are gone, right? They've used the recombo. The Vayne is out of the fight for the most part. All that's left is maybe a Cocoon and the Elise Claw, or in the Lysandra Claw. But Lysandra had to claw to get in, so Lysandra can use the Proto Belt, but that just gets her into a Rise Snare where she gets chunked out. Like, all of the tools for Clutch are no longer available because they had to be burned in order to react to this play first. So as a result, they're at this play and they are massively far behind. The members of Clutch, who need to be applying pressure to the members of TSM so that Huni can free hit, aren't able to do so. They used all of their tools, saving Huni's life. But Huni, with those tools unavailable, Huni isn't able to do anything, because those tools need to be available in order for Huni to do anything. So it's this catch-22 where if they don't save Huni's life, they don't have the DPS to win the fight. And if they do save Huni's life, they don't have the tools to allow Huni to have the DPS to win the fight. So because Huni got picked off here, and because Vulcan was so far away and the rest of Clutch was just far away enough that they had to burn their distance closing tools and their engage tools to get there and save Huni, there was no outcome that would allow Clutch to win this fight. The only possible, the best possible solution to this is to just allow Huni to die and push out mid lane and trade mid lane turret for top turret and some Baron vision, or try and make something like that happen, because by trying to hard commit to this fight, when hard committing means burning all of your gap closing and combat tools to get to the fight, and for a little bit of upfront burst onto Smoothie and Acadian, you're never winning this fight, especially when Huni is already basically out of it because he's has no health. So Huni, they invest so much in saving Huni's life, and he gets 3 auto attacks off and dies. And because the rest of Clutch committed so hard to this fight to try and save Huni, they all just die. They concede the Baron, and this is going to basically be the game. This is... The entire story of this game has, to some extent, been Huni just saying, me, give me all the resources, I want to hard carry the game. And then his team doing that and hard losing because of it. Vayne as a champion doesn't function like a Fiora. It doesn't function like one of those top lane split pushers that if they get a lead will win lane no matter what, and will continue to do so till the end of the game and will solo carry 1v9 because the enemy team can't deal with her. Vayne is a champion that is incredibly dependent on her team. And yes, she's dependent on her team in a different way than most AD carries are. That's why a lot of people feel that they can carry the game as Vayne on their own. Vayne doesn't need Peel. Vayne needs the rest of her team to be strong. That's part of why you have all of these toxic Vayne mains who think they're the best and always blame all their teammates, because if their teammates are behind or even, Vayne is very, very weak. But this game is, in the way the early and mid game played out, down to the game throwing team fight, it has entirely been Huni demanding all of the resources from Clutch and never actually being in a position to make any real use of them, and putting his team behind, himself behind, and ultimately costing the game because Huni picked a champion that is dependent on the rest of his team getting a bunch of resources and being ahead, and then demanded all the resources for himself. So this has been TSM versus Clutch. There's not much else to say. TSM is going to slowly close in on Clutch Gaming and eventually take the game in a minute or two. But this has been TSM versus Clutch. It was a very strange game because we did see the Vayne top, which does dramatically warp the state of the map. I think the pick is very poor. I think there maybe is a world in which you can pick Vayne top, specifically as a counter pick if the enemy has a jungler that is dependent on playing around bot side, or has a jungler that is dependent on getting early invades as opposed to early ganks, such as maybe a Kindred. And the enemy also has a top lane that will never be able to 1v1 a Vayne, such as a Scion or some other tank. But blind pick top lane Vayne into a champion, into a jungler like Skarner, into a matchup like the Akali, there was no way this was ever going to be successful, especially when TSM was able to win the other lanes on their own. So TSM, all they really had to do was devote resources to the mid and bottom lane, put those lanes ahead, and then hard tunnel Vayne in team fights. It's pretty simple, really. But this has been TSM vs Clutch Gaming. I'm John Valentine. Thanks for watching.